we have to be thinking not just about 2024, but 2026 and 2028. And the 14-year-olds today and the 16-year-olds today, they will be voting in 2 years and 4 years and beyond. So there's so much work to do to engage young people in these issues, to take them seriously, to cultivate them as voters and as storytellers. And I think civic storytelling is a critical way. It is the love language of this generation.
Amanda Little is a journalist, professor, and the creator of a nationwide civic engagement platform called Kidizenship. It's hard to believe that the author of 2 books, who teaches at Vanderbilt University, sort of fell into all of this by trial and error. A product of the Northeast who has come to love Southern storytelling, Amanda likes to learn by doing, whether that's reporting on the technical challenges of producing enough food to feed a growing and changing planet, or getting kids excited about voting. And whatever she puts her mind to, she finds a way to not just make it work, but make it sing. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. Was higher education always your goal? Were you going to be an academic, or?
Thank you for that question. Never was it a goal. I don't think anyone has ever asked me that, actually. I didn't go to grad school. I didn't go to J school, journalism school, in trade speak. I was really a person who just got sort of coughed out of my undergraduate experience into this dot boom of the late 90s. And I started writing for, publications, The Village Voice and in New York City right out of college, because there was just a lot to write about, and I could kind of present myself as an expert on this, on tech and the digital age when there were no experts. So it was trial and error for me. That's how I learned, and it's how I teach a lot of my courses in higher ed. But the reason why I'm at Vanderbilt is that someone in the English department read my first book and saw in my bio that I lived in Nashville, and I came here following my now husband, at the time my boyfriend, who was in music, and just said, "Wow, journalist in Nashville." There weren't a whole lot of us writing for national publications, and she said, "You want to guest teach this a course on investigative writing?" I said, yeah, but, full disclosure, I don't, I'm not a scholar, and I don't do pedagogy, but I can definitely, teach students to write investigative journalism the way I learned, which is just, throw them to the wolves, essentially.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing experience. I love being in the classroom. I love teaching.
If you are the accidental journalist, how do you dive into something as big as a book?
Ooh, great question. I learned how to write a book basically through iterative journalism. I did this first book, Power Trip, which is the story of America's love affair with energy, really building on a lot of kind of gonzo-style journalism and feature writing that I had been doing for Rolling Stone and Wired, and I kind of began to see that, all these stories I'm telling fit together, and this beat and this kind of area of expertise I'm building fits together into this bigger narrative, and so I started sort of building the book around a lot of the journalistic adventures that I'd had, and that was both a curse and a blessing, because I think there's a problem with books that have been built out of essentially, repurposed articles,
yeah.
Pieced in parts and pieces. So my second book, The Fate of Food, also kind of episodic storytelling, 12 chapters, 12 different locations, or 13 chapters, 13 different locations around the world, but building a kind of narrative thread and continuity throughout that became the challenge and the opportunity. And so for both of those books, it was really trying to figure out how to build a whole out of parts, and build in a lot of kind of connective tissue and storytelling between the parts.
We've seen so much scary reporting and storytelling about food and the food supply. Industrial farming and where does the waste go? And, GMO was a scary thing for a while for people. What was your ultimate take about our concerns when it comes to feeding ourselves?
I love that question because I really came into the story on food and the future of food and my own struggles with becoming a virtuous eater, becoming a vegetarian. I'm as likely to resort to the bag of Cheetos and the and the barbecue sandwich as anyone. And I really didn't want to explore the food landscape with this agenda. It really will require a lot of integrity and responsibility on the part of consumers. But I really felt like we needed to look at grand scale solutions for a very, very flawed industrial food system. I think there's a lot that we overlook in the great value and benefits of the current food system, right? We have an amazing supply and abundance and diversity of foods made possible by a lot of it in industrial and mid-size farms. But climate change pressures are really shifting what's possible and realistic for food production today and going forward. So the food system is very flawed. The food system is on the cusp and in the midst of transformation towards sustainability, and there's more promise and possibility there, in part because current food system approaches are so threatened by climate pressures and environmental pressures, right? You can still operate a coal plant in a storm or a drought or a heat wave. You can't run a farm in those conditions, right? So it's a fascinating story, especially because we all feel so emotional about the food we eat, and it's hard to accept that we're seeing major changes in food production and that the way to build sustainable food supply isn't necessarily just by going backward in time to the way things were done pre-industrial revolution, right? We still have to feed almost 8 billion people on this planet, eventually 10 billion in the next 30 years or so. And we have to innovate as much as we restore traditional food practices. So it's a complicated story. It's an emotional story. It's an exciting story. And for me, as a flawed consumer who loves meat and who loves Cheetos, how do I tell that in a way that is inclusive and that keeps in mind that equitable and sustainable food also must be affordable? So I've really enjoyed exploring that topic.
Give us a war story. Where did that story take you, and what was the most unlikely place where you saw something extraordinary?
I didn't expect to eat food out of a bioreactor, which I was one of the first journalists to consume what they call cultured meat or lab meats, which is meat that's been developed from cells that are essentially biopsied from livestock and animals.
This is like the test tube burger, right?
The test tube burger, exactly.
Was it palatable?
It was palatable. It tasted exactly like meat because it is meat. It's produced in the way that all meat is produced, which is that cells are given a place to do what they do, which is replicate. And so they sample cells from the muscles and fats and tissues of chickens and pigs and cows and create exactly the product that we consume, but just without the rest of the animal, without the bones and the hooves and the beaks and the
blinking eyes.
And the blinking eyes and the sentience of these beings. And so having visited many slaughterhouses, it actually, even though it was very disturbing for me to eat this kind of lab meat as someone who loves the farm to table kind of home style nostalgic foods, it actually occurred to me pretty early in the process of reporting this that it was a lot less disturbing than the industrial and meat production that we've all come to accept, and we just don't see how unsanitary it is, how inhumane it is, and yet I participate in, right? So I was like, if I want to eat meat, maybe this is actually a healthier and more sane way to do it. And so those kinds of perspective shifts happened across the board. It happened with GMOs. It happened with seeing robotics and AI applied to farmland. It happened with not everything. Animal cloning freaked me out. I didn't arrive at the conclusion that that was a great idea. But there were many moments in which I had to sort of push against my emotional relationship to food and get into a more pragmatic and intellectual relationship to food production, and realize that what we call sustainable needs to expand and shift. And what we call sustainable is often not really affordable for most of us.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos, and we'll be right back. If you're interested in building a more thriving and inclusive community by turning thoughtful generosity into positive change, well, you might want to know about one of our sponsors here at Banner and Company, the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. It matches compassionate givers with worthy causes in ways that benefit all of us. Check them out at cfmt.org. So you're a university professor teaching undergrads, right?
Correct.
But you have also created something for very young kids, it seems, with this Kidizenship idea. Explain that to us. What is Kidizenship, which, by the way, is a great word. I don't know if a kid came up with it.
Kids are actually much better at pronouncing it than adults, I found. But I actually came up with this idea in 2017 with the help of my kids, actually. I took my daughter to a march in Washington, January 2017. One of her best friends was at the Trump inauguration, and we were at the march, and we talked about that, how it is to have different political opinions and be friends with people you disagree with. She was 8 at the time, and she's heard all these people, it was 1 million strong, shouting, "This is what democracy looks like." And she was 8 and couldn't see much. And so she said, "Mom, what does democracy look like?" And as someone who was raised mostly in Washington, D.C., and went to school with a lot of kids whose parents were in politics, I found myself really shocked at how poorly I explained what democracy really is, as I didn't get much of a civics education myself. I mean, of course, I knew the basics, but really explaining that to my kids was difficult and felt urgently important in this moment of so much polarization in our country, so much disagreement. So I came back. I had a son, and my son was at Aiken. My daughter was at USN, and I talked to the teachers and the administrators about what schools are doing on civics. And I came to realize what so many of us have in the last few years, that civics education has just declined dramatically in schools.
Is that because they don't want arguments to form and they don't want kids to have opinions?
I don't think so. It actually began in the late 60s, early 70s, that post-Vietnam, that the funding for and the priority for civics ed declined. Our kind of suspicion around promoting patriotism through schools rose quite a bit in that era, and we also had a lot more demands for teachers and testing and requirements and core curricula that pushed out civics. And interestingly, the great origin story for public education in the U.S. was essentially to teach kids civics, and by the way, we'll teach them reading and arithmetic. But it was really essential in the kind of early stages of our democracy to teach kids how to be engaged participants, the rights and responsibilities of citizens. So it really is kind of shocking that in half century we've
pretty short time.
I think my mother and grandmother and knew much more, got much more civics education than I did. So I just thought, well, if I as a parent am willing to supplement my kids' athletics and arts education, I drive them to piano and basketball and whatever, why wouldn't I be willing to supplement their civics education? We have to do a lot at the state level to improve and increase requirements for civics ed, and that's a multi-year, maybe multi-decade process. But teachers we know are under so much pressure post-pandemic to get kids back up to speed. So the notion that we're going to add more to their plate and require them to teach more and better civics is a big ask. There are 11 out of 50 states that require a year or more of civics or government to graduate high school. The other 39 do not have that requirement. It's just not a priority. And, post the January 6th assault on the Capitol, we know that there's just real confusion about the role and the purpose of local and state and federal government. So why aren't we prioritizing that? And Kidizenship began as a group of 25 families in and around my neighborhood who met on the weekends to do a kind of homespun civics education program. And we had aunts and uncles and grandparents and parents come and do this multi-generational kind of civic learning. And we focused on 8 to 14-year-old kids, mostly because my kids were in that age range roughly.
Were these people like professional educators, or were just...
It was, some of them were in academia, but we had homeschool families. We had, parents who worked and didn't work. We had a big range of, political persuasions and socioeconomics. And we really had a diverse, wonderful group of families that participated in this. And the parents were sort of experimenting with how will I teach this different module? And we just had sort of parent teaching teams. But we brought in a lot of immersion programming, right? So the kids met with newly naturalized citizens, they met with state senators, they met federal judges, they got to talk to them and interview them in sort of real time about their experience in these roles in public service. We had singer-songwriters come in and talk about the intersection of music and politics. We had craft, lots of different craft projects, and it was just a ton of fun. I absolutely loved it. And as a content creator and a journalist, what I noticed is these kids are creating beautiful content. They were designing their own American flags and writing presidential speeches and, thinking about civic action.
And having fun, it seems.
And having fun.
Yeah.
And playing, some games and getting some candy on the side. But it was that kind of, they were seeing us value. They were seeing their parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents take interest in and value and learn alongside them. This material, and that really mattered too. They were learning it, and by week 4, they were running circles around us, and bringing in questions from the citizenship exam and realizing we couldn't answer them. That they were learning sort of more than their parents were, and I was just spellbound by the possibilities. But I also had multiple jobs and a book deadline and this and that, so I had to put it on hold. But after the killing of George Floyd and then the pandemic set in and all these young voices are, entering the national conversation about who we are as a country and what we want to become, I began to see that this was an opportunity to create a platform to inspire and incentivize and publish young voices. So I got a grant from Vanderbilt to create Kidizenship.com, and that was in 2020. And we started rolling out a series of contests, a creative civic contests that were inspired by that homespun programming that we did in person with the group. And our first contest was design your own American flag, which we had done with the kids. And we had some great public figures who signed on to be judges. and Beto O'Rourke and Julia Louis-Dreyfus and John Favreau and Lila Neves-Lee, who was the head of Young Republicans. We had Susan Molinari and Will Hurd, and eventually, for our most recent contest, Justin Jones and Bill Frist judged it together. So we really tried to get public figures with diverse political backgrounds who could come together and create an opportunity for kids to write themselves into the story of democracy with creative prompts, right? And every single contest we had just showed us more and more how engaged, how discerning, how open, thoughtful, creative, and inclusive the voices were of these young people. They're really operating from a space that many of us adults can learn from. They're mostly operating from a kind of pre-partisan mindset. They haven't developed fixed political identities. They're thinking really creatively and expansively about what democracy is and what their role is in it and how we can engage in civil discourse. They're demonstrating that in a way that I think many adults are not. And they're creating really unifying visions and stories. So along the way, through visual art and through writing and through video, through music. We had an anthem contest where kids wrote and performed their own national anthems, which was just wildly inspiring to me. Jason Isbell and Darius Rucker and Rhiannon Giddens and Genesis.
Helps to be in Nashville for that one.
Yeah, it was great. We had some very, very strong submissions from national students. And our most recent contest last year was inviting Nashville students to pitch the new mayor, Mayor O'Connell, on ideas to improve our city. It was called Show Us Your Nashville. So many beautiful ideas about how we can improve our city, and they got to pitch those to the mayor. They were honored by Metro Council. They got to the finalists presented in these public fora, and it was just so inspiring to me to see how creative expression can kind of translate into civic engagement and action.
So how big and wide is Kidizenship now? I know you have like a journalistic arm of it that publishes and continued contests, and I mean it's nationwide, I assume.
It is, and we have a contest that I'd love to tell you about.
Yeah.
But after those first 5 contests, we began to realize we had so much content. So much beautiful content that really couldn't be celebrated with just, winners. And then what do we do with all this other beautiful
great stuff, yeah.
Beautiful work that's been submitted? So we created Watch Us Rise, which is a national youth civic magazine. And we collected a lot of that creative content there. And then we began to realize that there was all this other opportunity to collect and aggregate and curate some of the best high school journalism and middle school journalism, and even college journalism that's out there, where students are doing this civic storytelling, where they're, as I said, documenting and kind of writing themselves into the story of their communities and democracy more broadly. So Watch Us Rise is a platform where we publish youth voices on civics and politics. We weave in the creative content from our contests. And that then led to the creation of SUN, which is the Students United News Network. And that is a collective of newsrooms all over the country. We started with more than 50 student newsrooms. We're going to 100 by the end of this year. That launched just this past spring. As this national kind of super newspaper or civic magazine grows nationally, our contests are getting more focused on, local communities. So we're bringing our next contest to Tennessee only. We were in Nashville last year, and now we're bringing it through all major cities in Tennessee and into rural communities through library networks. We're working with more than 1,500 teachers and librarians and homeschoolers to bring this contest to kids throughout Tennessee in the 4th to 8th grades. And the prompt is, make your speech. Write and perform your own presidential speech. And it's launching August 20th, and it runs through October 14th. And we have some wonderful civic leaders in Tennessee, including Nate Bargatze, the Tennessee Kid, and Ann Patchett, writer extraordinaire, and Allison Russell, Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, who will be judging the contest and creating space for kids to, express the kind of leadership they want to see in our country in the next 4 years.
It's Banner and Company. My guest is journalist, author, and professor Amanda Little. We'll be right back.
My fellow Americans,
I'm truly honored that you elected me to serve you as the President of the United States.
Today is the day where we will start a new chapter and make history.
yes, America is not yet the perfect country.
We need to set aside our differences. We need to come together to form one big home for all cultures.
And what is our goal, if not to be a country of liberty and justice for all? To take all of our diverse, unique voices and use them to create a harmony to show what we've made of this wonderful experiment of a country?
Let's join together.
We can and we will persevere.
Impossible isn't a word that I recognize. We can achieve anything we want.
Sounds to me like you are building and bringing along not only the future journalistic stars, but maybe political stars and leaders of the future. Are these kids who have innate ambition, or are they discovering it through these programs?
It's a great question because, journalism, which is what I teach and do myself, is something that Gen Z and Gen Alpha after it are really reimagining, right? They're using different forms of expression, different languages, different media platforms, and they're really expanding, I think, creatively. If we don't avoid it, but we actually invite them in to kind of help us reimagine what news media can be and what journalism can be, there's a great opportunity to bring new talent into journalism and civic storytelling. A lot of them don't really like to say the word journalism. They don't trust, legacy news media and old school journalism.
What do they prefer as a word, as a label?
I would probably say media is the closest to it, but many of us don't like that word either. We really don't trust what's happening in social media. We don't trust what's happening in, the news media industry broadly. But you made a beautiful point, which is that there are opportunities not only to draw students into their form of journalism, their form of civic storytelling, and maybe create a pipeline of talent into the news media that could help innovate and adapt and restore integrity to news media in the U.S., but also through learning journalistic practices. They learn how to be citizens, right? I mean, there's just and civically engaged. There's no more effective way, I think, to learn civic engagement than through the process of learning to be a journalist, learning to ask questions, learning to listen,
Learning to vet,
learning to search for truth, learning to consider a story from many sides, learning to agree to disagree. There's so many ways in which journalism invites kids to draw on their tremendous capacity for, again, content creation and storytelling. I mean, this is the best storytelling generation of our time. These kids have been documenting the world around them since they were pre-verbal, essentially. So they get storytelling, and I see that in the undergrads I teach. I mean, they're brilliant storytellers. They're doing so much more than I was doing as an undergrad in terms of sourcing fact and weaving, description with evidence, and they're just really great at it. But they need prompts. They need opportunities to, tell stories that matter, that are relevant, that are timely, and do so in a way that's accurate and has integrity. So we need to teach them media literacy. We need to teach them fact-finding and researching. But we also need to celebrate their art forms and their language and give them a space to do this work creatively.
But aren't they famously avoidant of face-to-face, voice-to-voice communication? Don't they like to do it with their thumbs instead of going and meeting someone?
That is one of the great conundrums of the current generation, right? And my courses at Vanderbilt are all about, sort of kicking my students into the field and encouraging them to tell stories and do the interviews and get on the phone
And meet
get
the
in
people.
the person,
Yeah.
meet the people in person. And it's true. This is a generation with a big paradox, right? They're fantastic content creators. They're great storytellers, but they have social anxiety and they, are able to hide behind these devices. So we really need to do the work of encouraging them to, get out and engage with people more directly. And I love this contest. We actually have done a presidential speech contest in the past that produced amazing submissions. But I love this contest because kids get to think about public speaking in a way and sort of step into this role of, if you were president, what would the next 4 years look like? What would you bring to the table? What does the America that you want to build look like? And how can you effectively share that with your audience? Who is your audience? How do you connect with that audience? How do you speak in a way that invites people in, that shows them you understand them? There's a lot of sort of social skill and confidence that comes with both writing a speech and delivering a speech. And they're great at selfie videos. So it's not necessarily that they're doing a lot of interacting in the process of producing their submissions. The finalists will be presenting their submissions at the Southern Festival of Books on October 26th.
Here in Nashville.
In Nashville. So they will actually have real in-person IRL, delivery of their speeches. But you're right that one of the great challenges for this generation in terms of engaging them in really creative but high integrity, sophisticated journalism is helping them not only learn how to research and fact find and find primary sources and engage with those sources, but also to interact with people directly and get beyond that kind of social anxiety that's been a barrier for a lot of them.
So it seems to me that it'd be great to have a Kidizenship presidential debate.
I love that
where
idea.
your kids would be the panel.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there is just so much potential to bring young voices into local and national conversations. And, I do think that these young people pre-18, which is the audience that we focus on, they're not old enough to vote.
Yeah, at 18, you've aged out. I assume you're not a kid anymore.
We're increasingly interested in working with college journalists, and occasionally we have college contributors doing our graphics and some of the writing, and they've come out of many of them their own high school newspapers and broadcast news organizations, and so we are working with some over 18-year-olds, but yeah, our audience is mostly high schoolers and teachers and their parents, and we're really interested in engaging that audience. But yes, I think those voices, whether they're interviewing candidates, whether they're playing the role of candidates and trying to articulate what they would say as candidates, just powerful content creation opportunities. And I think when you look at the quality of of the opinion writing and the reporting and even the investigative journalism a lot of these students are doing, they should be published in local and national platforms. We publish them on Watch Us Rise, but we're also working with partners to bundle and publish some of these voices in local and national news outlets, because these voices matter. They are our, voting future. They are really informed and certainly passionate. And a lot of the major issues of our time relate directly to them, whether it's climate change, gun law reform, or gun law protections, immigration, you name it. So many of these topics, book banning, are so relevant to kids, and a lot of the activity and engagement on these issues is really driven by a lot of young people. So we need to bring them more actively into not just the news media industry, but into a kind of coming of age process as citizens, engaging their voices, mentoring them, and rewarding them. So everything we publish is paid for. We offer syndication fees and commission fees for every article we publish, every graphic we publish. And of course, we offer prizes to.
I was going to say, kids and contests. There's got to be something besides bragging rights.
That's right.
What does the winner get?
We have 6 prizes from $500 to $1,000. So there are real incentives here. And, part of this is taking kids' voices seriously. And I think offering significant prizes and certainly offering, contributor contracts and syndication fees and publishing fees to students is one way of showing them we take your voice seriously. And, with the right, engagement with appropriate research and, accuracy and integrity in the work, you deserve to be treated as a young professional. That's a great way to bring young voices into the media ecosystem, but it also makes them feel a sense of belonging in the national conversation. And this matters when we're cultivating the youth vote. This matters when we're fighting not just for the right for everyone to vote, but for the desire to vote, right? Helping kind of break through the apathy of young people feeling like they're not seen and heard, like their voices don't matter in democracy. I think this can be really crucial to building engagement and building a sense of passion and belonging in democracy today.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Haruch and Andrea Tudhope. Original music by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. And since we've been talking about Kidizenship, let's go out with a recent winner in the Sing Your Anthem contest. Here is Land of the Free by Shreya Dharan.
Talk away the land of the free. Oh, don't try and disappear. We all heard and we're all here. Stand and wave our flag in the air. Look, stand proud, we'll make it fair. Oh, don't try and hide in your walls. When we come together, free our
Final question is in the fishbowl.
Okay.
You pick one randomly. This was posed by a previous guest, and
Okay.
then we'll ask you to pose one after you answer
Great.
the
I
one
love
you've
it.
chosen.
I love this.
If you could read it out loud.
From Henry Martin. Are you ever going to...
Are you ever going to retire? And if so, what are you going to do?
Oh my goodness. I love this question from Henry. Thank you. I don't imagine that I'll ever retire. This is the beautiful privilege of being in the world of writing and teaching, is that you're forever in the beginner's mind, right? Like the more I learn as a journalist and the more I learn as an educator, I am better at the work I do. The more humble I am, the more I realize I don't know. And so I think that by the time I'm 80 or 85 or 90 or 95, I will have really gotten more and more in this place of the beginner's mind, where I can be a much better storyteller, a much better journalist, and a much better educator, because I'll be open to all the possibilities of how to teach and how to tell the truth and how to draw people into the stories I tell. So I hope I never retire, and I might be a little slower at getting it all done, but this is work I want to be doing forever.